Good morning. Very excited to be here with the inaugural BSides here in Sydney. It is a tremendous honor for me to be here, and I would also like to introduce Mr. Greg Howell. He is one of my team members who is out there with me. So I was the overall mission commander out there for our mission that I'm going to get into here shortly. But all the stuff that we were doing forward in these countries, we're running back to Greg. Him and his team were coordinating everything and then essentially making sure we were on task with what we needed to do. A little bit of background about me: U.S. Air Force. Been in for about not quite 15 years now. I've been doing cyber for about 6 years, from a combination of cyber-related threat intelligence into the more operational the operational world, taking our defensive capabilities and going out to work with foreign countries. So let's jump into it. I'm going to talk about what the Hunt Forward is. It's a relatively new term. Just out of curiosity, how many people have heard of Hunt Forward before? A few of you, okay. I'm going to give a little bit of background about where Hunt Forward came from. I'm going to talk a little bit about what a national CPT is, because that's what we are and what our team makes us unique versus what you typically see from other teams such as incident response teams. We're going to talk about what we're doing with our foreign partners, in this case governments throughout Europe, as well as other parts of the world. And then we're going to talk about the successes and also some of the challenges associated with the missions that we've conducted. And then I'm going to finish it off with talking about how we on the government side want to work better with each of you, whether it's from the universities, whether it's from the private sector, commercial sector, how we can better partner together. So a little bit of background. As you all probably know, this news travels fast across the world. But in the 2016 US presidential elections, there was a significant amount of Russian interference, specifically hacking the Democratic National Committee, releasing a bunch of information publicly that was damaging to Hillary Clinton that supposedly or allegedly led to Donald Trump being elected president. Ultimately, we decided this is not something we're going to allow to happen in the future. We have to stop this. We have to prevent any kind of interference in our democratic processes going forward. But what exactly did Russia do? Ultimately, their goal was to use our love of social media against us. A lot of Facebook ads, a lot of social media posts, trying to ultimately sow discord and a lot of anger in between the two parties. And the Hunt Forward was a direct result in response to these aggressive actions that were taken against us. Now fast forward to the fall of 2018. We have our US midterm elections coming up, and we decided what we're going to do is we're going to have a very concerted approach to tackle this problem. And what we did was we realized we can't do what we want to do because of our legal system. We had to have a bunch of changes that enabled us to then go forward and conduct all the operations that we need to conduct to defend our democratic processes. So what does that mean? Congress had to enact laws that gave us as the military better authority and legal authorization to work with Department of Homeland Security, to better work with the FBI, the civilian sector of our government. Additionally, we had to get authorization so that we could send US military teams out into foreign countries to work better with foreign countries. Because of this new ground, we were able to send teams into Eastern Europe in support of the midterm elections. And it was the National Cyber Protection Teams who are tasked with defending anything that the President of the United States is deemed important enough for national security. So whatever that may be, whether it's electrical grid, whether it's the financial sector, it doesn't matter what the topic is, National Cyber Protection Teams are the teams that go answer the call. So what exactly is a National Cyber Protection Team? We're a small team, but we conduct defensive cyber operations only. I want to stress that. Defensive cyber operations only. And it's whatever we need to do to defend the nation. What is unique about our team is we primarily conduct threat hunting operations. So we are working with foreign partners, we're working with industry, we're working with anybody that we can, but our specific goal is threat hunting. We're looking for those APTs that are in the networks, that are trying to steal your government data, your proprietary information. That's who we're looking for. We are unique in that we don't do any all-encompassing things that, say, an incident response team would do, or a pen testing team, or a vulnerability assessment team. We do bits and pieces of those, we do elements of them. However, we collectively are not any one of these teams. What capabilities we can bring to the fight, as we say, but what we work with our foreign partners with is, as you can see here, we have our network-based forensics. We have our network operators, then they work with our host operators for both Windows and Linux. And these two sets of operators work seamlessly together. We have team members that conduct malware analysis. Now this is more what I would say battlefield triage, or the initial triage of the malware. And then once we do that forward on location, then we have a reachback support that we can have do more the longer term reverse engineering of those malware samples, can extract additional indications of compromise, any C2 domains, anything like that that we can glean. They'll do that longer term analysis for us. We also have members that have our infrastructure expertise. So when we bring our equipment forward, we have specific individuals that are tasked with connecting our equipment into the mission partners network, whatever the case may be, whatever the equipment might be. And where we're going, we get into areas where there's a lot of equipment that we've never seen before. And our guys have to know their networking fundamentals so well that they can take the concepts and apply it to any particular networking device. We also have a team that does threat intelligence. Now this is extremely important, as you all are very much so aware, because you can't hunt for an adversary if you don't know who that adversary is. And how are you going to hunt for an adversary if you don't know what they do? How do they conduct their operations? What are they going after? What are the targets? All of these are tailored to whatever specific mission set we need. So depending on the size of the network, we might increase the amount of equipment we bring. We also might increase the personnel, totally specific to whatever the situation is and what the mission partner that we're working with requests. One of the caveats that we have to abide by is we cannot take our US procured equipment that is specific to the military because of a lot of export restrictions and a lot of other red tape and bureaucratic processes. So what we had to do is we had to come up with commercial off-the-shelf equipment. Equipment you could go to Dell, you could go to HP, you could buy it straight off the shelf. It was already manufactured, ready to go. The other thing was the open source software. As we partner with foreign countries, as we partner with industry, we all have to be careful about what proprietary information we release to the public or release to that entity that we're working with. With using open source equipment and software, we can get completely around that requirement. So for example, working with several of the countries, we've had to help them set up the ELK stack, for example, as a SIEM, so that they can conduct their analysis. Using the MISP, Malware Information Sharing Platform, to better incorporate IOCs that they can get from MISP. Moloch, Wireshark, there's a whole host of tools that we use, and it totally depends on what the country that we're working with, what they want us to use, what they're familiar with. So as I mentioned, we are similar to an incident response team because we are going into networks where we have pretty good information that there is an advanced threat actor out there. And we are working with the country to find where that actor is, what indications of compromise we can find, and how we can remove that actor. But we're not a full incident response team. We can do elements of pen testing, red teaming assessments. One of the things that a cyber protection team is known for is a component that works with the local defenders in order to ensure that the defenders can incorporate the things that we're teaching them or that we're working on, and then give them little exercises or scenarios to make sure that they can incorporate those defenses. The vulnerability assessments piece is pretty much inherent if you're going to get into the nuts and bolts of a network. You're going to inherently find weaknesses or vulnerabilities in a network. We don't want to be the weakest link, but we want to identify what the weakest link is. However, we are not solely focused on the vulnerability assessment piece. We are focused on what an adversary, what an APT might be looking for those vulnerabilities in that network and how they could exploit it. That's where we can come in and make our money, so to speak. Ultimately, we're very specialized teams. We do bits and pieces of all of this, which makes us very unique. Also, what makes us unique is the fact that we are going into foreign countries to do this, where a lot of businesses aren't allowed to go. This is part of our cyber strategy within the Defense Department. We want to build these relationships and partnerships not only with foreign governments, but also with industry. We know that the US government, the Australian government, cannot solve cybersecurity, cyber defense by itself. Nobody can. It forces us to come to the realization and then act on the fact that we have to share. We have to get better at sharing information. We have to get better at working together to defend our networks collectively across the world. One of the things that we found, though, is you can't just walk into a business, you can't walk into a foreign government and say, "Hi, I'm from the US. I'm here to help." It goes over about like that. Yeah, okay, let me close the door and have a good day. But what that means is, from Cybercomm's perspective, we have to get better. It's a growing process. The operations that we started conducting last fall was the very first time that we had done this. The very first time that we had sent teams forward to work with other countries to partner in this kind of capacity. As you do that, you learn more and more about how to work together. But in order to do that, there's a lot of challenges, or as we say in the Air Force, I'm giving you an opportunity to excel. Opportunity to learn some key things here. But one of the things that we, in the US military side, specifically in the IT or the communications arena, we have teams that are dedicated to being that mobile deployable force that can go work with our Army brethren, our Navy, Marine Corps, and other Air Force entities in a combat environment. I will say that is not us. We are your traditional network defense type role. However, taking a large group of folks and a large group of equipment overseas in a short period of time is challenging. For example, in the US, I can take 70 pounds worth of luggage, no problem. In Europe, you're 50 pounds. So we had to take our servers out of our Pelican cases, buy a suitcase, put it in the suitcase, wrap your clothes around the server so you can get it into country because it was overweight. A lot of challenges, but it made for some unique storytelling afterwards. As I mentioned with the equipment problems that we had, because we couldn't take what we call a cyber weapon system, but it's basically just our servers and switches and stuff that we use for our defensive purposes, we cannot take that overseas without a bunch of red tape and hassle. So what we did was we had to purchase open source equipment, the COTS equipment like I mentioned. The problem is when we purchased it, due to the inevitable delays, it arrived in our building the day before our teams left to go to Germany. And then from Germany, they were in Germany for a couple of days, and then we went forward into additional countries from there. Our guys had to set up the equipment, load all the software on it, get it completely configured within 48 hours so that we could then take it forward into these other countries. No small feat, but that's just one of the unique challenges that we have working in the environments that we work with. Now this would be a little bit easier if we had done better coordination with the host nation governments. So there was a very high level coordination that occurred. The prime minister of these countries said, yep, you can come in. These are your POCs you're going to work with. We showed up Monday morning for our meeting, and the first question was, who are you? I'm from the government. I'm here to help. So we have to figure out how I can build that trust with you and your IT department so that we can get our equipment connected and assure you that we are not doing anything that you would deem as unacceptable, inappropriate, anything like that on your network. The way we had to do this that would build the most amount of trust was I sat you down right next to me. Shoulder to shoulder, you're looking at the exact same information that I'm looking at. I'm showing you everything that I'm doing, so you have complete confidence that what I'm doing is in accordance with what you gave me permission to do. Anytime you go overseas, though, you have the inevitable language barrier problem. This was particularly a problem in one of the countries we went to because, as you all know, when you're doing your host forensics, the volatile memory is very, very important to capture. It's one of the very first things you need to try to capture. And one of the teams asked one of the local IT administrators, we have this host over here. We need to go start our forensic process on it because we think there might be something malicious there. Immediately, that individual went, wiped the machine, put it back out on the network, and said, no more problem, we're good to go. Actually, what I meant was, we need to analyze the memory, pull a memory copy, so we can analyze it. Oh, okay. So the next time, disconnected the computer, brought it to the desk, sat it down on the desk. Okay, there you go. Sorry, what I meant was, we need to leave the computer on, and let's go to it together. And then they were able to get the memory pull and proceed with their investigations from there. So language becomes a rather significant challenge, especially if you don't have a linguist or somebody who speaks that local language that can help you out. There's lots of cultural nuances, and you always are cautious and careful not to offend anybody. However, it also creates some unique challenges. How many of you in the audience today feel there is ample budget, time, training resources for your needs? Good, I didn't see a single hand go up. That problem is universal. In the US government, we're the same way. We would love to have more training. Everybody who works in the cybersecurity industry understands that cybersecurity is very, very important, but it is not funded appropriately for what we are tasked to defend. We are undermanned, we're underfunded, under-resourced. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but it also creates a lot of opportunities as well. For example, the countries that we worked with, they had heard of ELK, but they had never stood up their own instance of the Elastic Stack. So how can we do that? We can sit down and we can work through the problem together. How do I use Moloch or Wireshark or any other PCAP analysis tool? Let's sit down and I'm going to show you. Here's how we do it. And then other countries who were more proficient within cybersecurity, oh, you do it that way? Well, we do it this way. And so it truly becomes a collaborative learning environment where we're learning from you and you're learning from us. So we're sharing information. We're all growing together. Overall, we determine a successful partnership if we're increasing information sharing. Because if I have a situation where you invite me into your country, we conduct our defensive operations together, we leave, everybody's happy. But if I don't continue the relationship, what kind of problems does that cause? It makes it really difficult if I ever want to come back to your networks. If we find anything additionally malicious that we want to work with you on, makes it hard to do. So if we can increase the information sharing over the long term, not just during the time that we're there, if we can increase the defensive capabilities and capacities of the local defenders in the countries we work, then for us, it's a win at the end of the day. And ultimately, our goal is to identify and remove any threats that we can, but do it together. That way, we're learning, they're learning, and we're all sharing. The key to success, though, is, like I mentioned, I have to be able to build that trust. If I can't build the trust between my team and the team on the ground that we're working with, we are not going to be successful. It doesn't matter the situation. Working shoulder to shoulder, as you see here, was the way that we found to best show our true intentions. But ultimately, it's the hands-on collaboration that we focused our efforts on. It's sharing the tools, sharing the equipment, sharing the methodologies. The methodologies ended up being one of the biggest things that we saw was from a local cyber defender perspective was more important. If I understand how to hunt for an adversary, if I understand how to analyze a PCAP, it doesn't matter what tool I use, I can still analyze that PCAP. And so we really focused on the methodology piece, and that was what really paid a lot of dividends for us. So our hunt methodology that we use, because again, we are focused on looking for APTs and networks. Who has not heard of the MITRE ATT&CK matrix? A few. So the MITRE ATT&CK matrix is what we base our hunting methodology off of, looking at the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures that APTs and other threat actors use. The way I described this to the folks that we worked with was find evidence of process injection in your network? Can you do it? Well, you first start off by asking, what information do I need to collect? What data sources do I need? Do I have a way to collect that data? Do I have WinLogBeats? Do I have Sysmon? Do I have some other logging agent that can get those host logs and push it to a SIEM so that we can then analyze? And from there, can I visualize that data? Just because I collected it, if I can't extract that information and visualize what that means, run my analytics against it, whatever your search query might be, then you're going to have issues. And that's what we focus on, is understanding the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures that an adversary would use. What makes this successful, though, is you have to have good threat intelligence. You have to understand, what does APT 1 go after? What does APT 5, APT 10, whoever, pick your APT. What do they want? Is that threat actor looking for economic espionage type data? Are they looking to try to steal your intellectual property? Or are they trying to figure out what your government is doing? If you can understand what your adversary is trying to do, you can then effectively hunt in the network on the host for that specific threat actor. So what did we find? Throughout not only the operations last fall, but all of the cybercomm operations before that and since, has led to quite a few significant discoveries. We found everything you can think of, from script kiddies. An example of this is we saw a reverse HTTP, good old interpreter from Kali Linux. And then we've also found the advanced persistent threats. We found APT-17, it's a Chinese-based group. APT-28, Turla Group, several others. Not only did we find these specific groups, but what was the activity that we found? In one country, we saw an active session. We saw an adversary try to log in with invalid credentials and then try to laterally move throughout the network. Being able to capture that, you can truly understand what technique, what tactic, and what procedure that particular threat is using to try to move laterally in the network. What we also found was a ton of cryptocurrency mining, you name it. A lot of times we take for granted our antivirus software. In some of these networks, if you updated your antivirus software more frequently, you would block out a lot of the things that we saw. But it also makes for a very, very unique challenge. How do you look for a needle in a stack of needles? How do you sort through when there's a lot of things to find the one specific piece you're looking for? You can't ignore all the things that you're finding. You still have to document it. You still have to remediate those issues as best you can. But how do you do that? What's your process? At the end of the day, as you can see here, what we found was new malware. This was malware that didn't exist previously, and also new variants of malware. We found new C2 infrastructure. We found new TTPs for how some of these threat actors are conducting their operations. We're finding new ways. And one of the big questions that we asked is, what do we do with this information? This is very valuable information, and we got it from working with foreign partners throughout the world. What do we do with it? So there was a individual who said, you know what? Why don't we just post it to VirusTotal? And so we went up to the Cyber National Mission Force commander, it's a 2-star general, who his boss is General Nakasone, who's the commander of Cybercomm, and basically said, hey boss, what do you think? We should create a VirusTotal account, post some of these malware samples to VirusTotal, and let the cybersecurity industry do what they do best. Rip apart that malware, find the IOCs, make the attribution call for what threat actor it is, and go from there. Now, on initial thought, you might think, oh, this is a government, surely there's a long process. It took about 72 hours for this to happen. Very, very quick. This is how much the Cyber National Mission Force and Cyber Command have put into sharing of information. It is a huge, huge effort that we are trying to push this information out to share what we're finding with the people who need it most. So if you aren't following on Twitter, CNMF Virus Alert, and all the virus samples that we are posting is in the CyberComm Malware Alert within VirusTotal. We started this, as you see from this pinned tweet here, 5 November 2018, our very first post. Now, even though we haven't posted a large number of samples, this is what some of the fellow cybersecurity analysts have said. One sample was a new external variant. This was a Kaspersky Labs report. When it was first posted to VirusTotal, Kaspersky Lab and Zone Alarm were the only two AV engines that flagged in that malware. 4 days later, when this article was written by Cyberscoop, 41 of the 71 were now creating signatures off of those two files that were submitted for that external variant. Another example was a new LoJack variant. This is the UEFI rootkit. ESET has some really good reporting on this particular piece of malware, but this was a new one. As you can see here, seemed to be new, related to UEFI rootkit. So far, the quantity has been small, but the quality is high. So what we found is we are in a very, very unique position because we can take our teams and go government to government. A lot of the companies in the world don't get that opportunity. And if they do, it's on a very, very limited scope. It's a very, very small segment of the network. Maybe if there was a compromise in one particular portion of the network, you might call an incident response team in, conduct their investigation, and then leave. But you don't get access to the entirety of the network. Some of the ways in which we are trying to build on our success in the information sharing arena is, what's the next step? How do I go from sharing malware samples to what? What's the end result? So if I gave you not only a malware sample, but if I also gave you a report that covers the TTPs that we observed, the full investigation on a host, what could you do with it now? Could your heuristic software, your IDSs, your IPSs, could they be improved? If you understand the TTPs, if I gave you the more complete picture, the full context of the situation, it makes everybody better. Additionally, because of what we're seeing, we can truly share not only the TTPs, the IOCs, the malware, but we can share more. What about the threat intelligence? So what if we can refine the specific targets that an APT is going after based on what we find? If we can find that evidence and say, hey, we saw this particular APT in this network over here, which was completely against what they normally go against. If, for example, if you have an APT that likes to target ICS SCADA networks, but then you see them in the Prime Minister's network, trying to get access to the Prime Minister via spear phishing or something else, that is not a normal target set for that particular group. Now, why are they trying to do that? And we can start working with you in the security industry to figure that out. As you all know, there are nuances to any network that we work in. ICS SCADA, the power grid, that is a huge area. What about the financial sector? What other networks are what we would consider one-off networks? What about Bluetooth IoT devices? I think there's more than a few vulnerabilities in the IoT world. So how do we then look in those networks for those vulnerabilities, for those threat actors that are taking advantage of those vulnerabilities and gaining further access to their targets through those vulnerabilities? But more importantly, how do we work together to figure out what those are? If a team like mine can get access into an electrical grid, what can we find? What can we share? How can we work together? We're such a small team. If I only have a handful of folks based on this particular mission set, it's really hard to get all the different levels of expertise that I need in one team. I need to be able to call in extra help for that expertise. And everybody has seen this pyramid of pain. It's those TTPs that are the hardest thing to find. And that's where we can partner together to truly get at the key problem of finding and removing these APTs in our networks. What are some other ways we could potentially work together? So one of the things that, I'll share a little side story real quick. With regards to the training, one of the things that we find is, like all of you have found, there's varying levels of expertise, there's varying levels of experience within the IT world. How do you walk into a IT department who maybe isn't to the caliber that they should be? How do you bring them up? One of the countries that we went to, we walked in day one. Here I am from the government. I'm here to help. You're here to help me. Okay. Here's 2 pages of training that I want you to conduct. I want you to teach me assembly, reverse engineering, IDA Pro, Ollie debug in 1 week. The next week, I want you to teach me how to run a SOC. I need you to teach me what all the different operators should be, how many people do I need. Each week of a 60-day timeline was mapped out. Now, I don't know if anybody in this room could do that. I know we definitely couldn't do it. But how do we balance the needs of what we can do to get them on the right path? And that is where, from our perspective, we can also leverage the industry partnerships. So one of the things that, in preparing this presentation, I was informed of a thing called a no-fee contract. This might be like a US government term, but essentially what a no-fee contract is if you work for a security company and I can use your expertise. Let's use ICS SCADA because it's an easy example. So I'm going to an ICS SCADA network and I don't have enough expertise on my team to account for the network size that I need to go look in. So if I can identify some expert in the field who is a cybersecurity expert within ICS SCADA, a no-fee contract basically is the easiest mechanism where the US government can bring you along with the team to go into that foreign country, give you the benefit of the experience in helping us not only look for an APT in that network, but then also if we let you report out the findings, then now you are furthering your company's efforts, but it's at no cost to the US government. That is one option in which we can explore. Another big problem that we have, as you can imagine on the government side, it's very difficult for us to publicly acknowledge the threat actors that we're finding. The fact that I'm calling out APT 17, the fact that I'm calling out APT 28 saying we found you, what does that mean? How do I get that information? So in order for me to comfortably tell an organization that we found this threat actor in your network, I have to have the open source, I have to have the unclassified reporting, because we can't keep all of our information tied up in highly classified channels. It doesn't do you any good. It makes our job significantly harder. That ties back into the overall theme that you're seeing in this presentation is how do we get that information shareable? Working with you, members of the cybersecurity industry, to attribute the malicious cyber actors then enables us to do a lot more things. For example, one of the other big tenets of Cybercomm's mission is to impose cost on our adversaries. What does that mean to impose cost in the cyber domain? Have you ever built an exploit? Have you ever built an implant that you would try to use? It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort. It might take weeks, it might take months, it might take years depending on what you're trying to accomplish. What happens if I take all that effort and I release it to VirusTotal? You now have to start over. Either you have to find new ways to encrypt it or other ways you can change enough of that piece of malware so that it doesn't get flagged by the virus engines, or you have to completely start over and build out new infrastructure, new tools, whatever the case may be. This takes time, takes money, takes a lot of effort. We can do that. Additionally, if we can identify at the cyber persona level who these people are, where they work, what are they doing, we can also start to get into the more economic side of things. From a government approach, we can implement sanctions. Those are very effective. But from a corporate level, maybe you can start to refuse business with other entities that are tied to these malicious actors. But the tool development piece, if I can make it harder on you, you have to go back to the drawing board repeatedly to build new tools, find new ways of changing up your habits. Then it makes it so much easier for us to defend. But it has to, ultimately, at the end of the day, it has to be a collaborative effort. This has to be an opportunity where we on the government side, and it doesn't matter if it's the US government, whether it's the Australian government, the British government, any government, we like to stovepipe, we like to share our information with only ourselves. How can we give you the information you need to be effective? If I can give you the information that I'm gleaning, the information that I'm gathering by virtue of the fact that I am in these networks that very, very few businesses will ever have access to, but enable you to do your job better, then at the end of the day, we are defending not only our democratic processes, our country, we're helping to defend the entire world. All the devices that are out there with better antivirus signatures, better intrusion detection and prevention systems, you name it, across the spectrum. We can now defend these networks significantly better. That's all I have. With that, I'll take any questions you have. For those who couldn't hear, the question was regarding funding within these countries, if they have adequate funding. And the resounding answer is no. There's a huge problem with funding, especially if you have a very small country. You just don't have the financial resources to dump into cybersecurity and cyber defense. That's where the US government and several other governments have partnership programs and other programs where, from a government to government perspective, we can help out with those things. We have regional security cooperation agreements between a lot of the governments, but specifically the US. We can leverage those relationships to help build out your defensive capacity. And that's what we're seeing a lot in Europe right now. So one of the things that we're trying to change the attitude of intel sharing is, one, in places like this. If you go to any cybersecurity conference, you will likely find the National Security Agency. You'll find NSA there. But you're not finding Cybercom. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get the word out there that we have a different mission set than the NSA and other government agencies. And we're also showing and demonstrating by virtue of what we are sharing that we can break those silos. We can get away from the old mentality of I can't share what I have to why can't I? Is a hash of a file classified? I mean, it's a hash. What about an IP address? It's just 4 octets. Does it really need to be treated as if it's the world's biggest secret? In most of the cases, we find that no, it doesn't need to be. Now, you have to feed the machine. You have to get those processes lined up so that you can get that information to a releasable state. And that's one of the big processes we have going on right now, is trying to streamline that process to get information pushed out in a way in which we can then start sharing it more broadly. Trying to invest in things like MISP, sharing resources there, is some of the avenues that we're exploring right now. That's a great idea, and honestly, it's not one that we've thought of yet. But having a alternative malware analysis repository, if you will, I think that's what you're referring to. So right now, what we're trying to do in the meantime is set up a sharing agreement where if you find something in your network, you have an avenue that you can pass it back to us. We can help with the resources to analyze the malware and get you the results. But you're right, I think funding something more large scale that is an international effort is a great idea. Just one we haven't explored yet.
Shatters, basically.
So I knew somebody was going to ask this question. Our team does not. We're strictly defensive in nature. That being said, there has been a lot of reporting about the willingness to take action against the adversaries. So if we glean information on the defensive side that we can attribute to a malicious actor that is trying to target US or US interests, then we pass it to the appropriate parties and then they can make that decision from there. So an example, it doesn't really matter which APT, but what we try to do is leveraging something like the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. What we can figure out is what are the most observed TTPs for that APT. From there, you really need to get down into the weeds of what information do I need to collect. If I'm looking for evidence of SMB for lateral movement, what is the piece of information in the network traffic that I need to identify? From there, if I can break that problem down, that's my biggest challenge, is what information fields, what data do I need to collect? Then you look at what tools and resources you have to collect it. So for example, if I'm trying to find information on the host, do I have a logging capability? And here in Windows has event logging and some other things you can do, but do you have a server or any kind of aggregation of those logs where you can truly do analysis at scale? Pushing something WinLog Beats or Sysmon is a really easy way that is free. It's open source. And then if you can configure those to get the right data points you need, then it's a matter of how do I extract that data now from my analytics? What does my Kibana dashboard look like? What does my Wireshark or my Mullet query look like to get that data out? And then we also build in a process of validating the information. So for example, if I walk through that process, I identify the key points that I need to collect, and then I make sure that I'm collecting that data in the network, and then I'm analyzing it with my, whatever my SIEM is. Now, is it truly absence of evidence? Does that mean that an adversary isn't there, or does it mean that they're not using that particular TTP? If I've come back and validated that all my data sources are correct and my entire process up to that point is good and valid, then at what point do I say, I don't have evidence of this? And then from there, we try to figure out what else might they be doing. Do I understand the procedure part enough of what an adversary is doing that maybe instead of using this DLL, maybe they're using this one? So do I understand it enough that I can look for some other file or some other piece of information that they might try to make a new, just a tweak on an old process? How do we know if we're achieving success over the long term? From my perspective, success point number one, do I get an invitation back? So in virtually every case, every country that we've gone to thus far, we have been invited back, which is very important. And it also gives us an opportunity to see the recommendations that we gave you, did you implement them? And what we're seeing as we now start to return to continue to work with these countries, they are making substantive changes and improvements, which is good because one, from us, it means you care and you're taking an active approach. You're doing what you can. Resource constraints aside, you're doing what you can. But depending on the country size and how much money you can devote to it, you might see small incremental process of improvement, or you might see bigger leaps. Just depends on the country. Yes, that is a process that we have. It's called a deconfliction process, but we try to work with the foreign governments, not only the mission partner whose country we're in, but also with our government partners and other countries to say, if we release this publicly, does that cause us problems? So for example, if you have a new C2 infrastructure with a new piece of malware that nobody's openly discovered yet, and we found out, if I out that publicly, then our ability to collect that information now is significantly hindered. So what's the balance of getting the information out to maybe some antivirus companies? Maybe I don't want to focus on antivirus. Maybe I want to focus on like firewalls. Can I get a company like, say, Palo Alto or some other company from a firewall perspective to capture those rules, maybe report it back to us, build that agreement, they report it back to us, but not necessarily take action on it yet? I will say for the record that was complete conjecture. As far as what we will or won't do in those instances. But that is a way in which we are definitely deconflicting within the governments of what gets released. That part is fact, but the other piece about identifying new infrastructure, I can't really. One of the ways that we gain trust is our Guard and Reserve forces within the US have state partnerships with a lot of foreign countries. So they may already have mill-to-mill relationships. And in that case, they say, hey, we can have a cyber relationship now too. And that is usually an easy way to get into the door, to have the conversation. Other times, it's relying on our regional security cooperation efforts to say, hey, if you would like, we can send a cyber team in, they can help you with the defenses of your networks. And if the country says, you know what, that's a good idea, they submit a request for support or request for assistance to our government, and then our government formally says, yep, we can do that. here's the team, here's the resources, and then we start planning it from there. Doesn't always work out as quickly and easily as we would like, but that's basically how the process works for all these countries we're working with now. Depending on the country that we're in, determines if we can leave the equipment potentially, or if we have to take it with us when we leave. But when we configure the equipment within that mission partners network, they're right there with us, and we show them exactly how it's configured. We walk them through the configuration process. So for example, in one country, they didn't have a SIEM at all. And so we use Security Onion with the ALK stack to show them how easy it is to set up their own SIEM. For a small enough network, you can get away with that as far as storage capacity for logs and some other data that you're trying to collect, like PCAP. But we absolutely will sit down and we will show them how to configure that based on our best practices that we have gathered over the years, and then try to share that so that they can implement those as well. But we're very transparent. They're very generic. So that, as I mentioned, we don't have a lot of times a pre-coordination with the IT departments, and so we don't know exactly what we're getting into when we go to show up with our equipment. So we inherently have to have more generic equipment that we can configure quickly to account for the changes in that particular network. Yes, so the question was if one of our goals is to build up other teams that can also do this, as well as working with other foreign governments to build the same capabilities. The answer is both. So our intent when we go out on these missions is not only to build up the defensive capacities of the teams that we work with forward. So for example, if a country is trying to establish a SOC, we're working with them to try to identify how they should organize their SOC, how they should configure their equipment, making sure they're getting the right data feeds coming in throughout their network, making sure you're getting host logs. That tends to be one of the biggest problems we see is not having host logging. Might be on by default on that particular machine, but it doesn't go anywhere. So it's hard to get all that configured up front. What we're also trying to do is we're trying to make this an international effort. So if I can get the Australian government, if I can get the British government, other governments on board with these type of defensive operations, it truly becomes an international effort to help other countries. So when it comes to helping, whether it be NATO or other international organizations, we're absolutely focused on trying to build those relationships, build up capacity as well, so that other teams can go do the same thing that we're trying to do. And with that, I think my time is up, but if you have any additional questions, we'll be around for the rest of the conference. Thank you.